I stood in my kitchen, frozen in place, staring down at a credit card statement that showed $47,000 in charges. I had never made designer handbags, luxury vacations, jewelry I had never seen in my life, and every single purchase had been made by my own children, the very ones I had trusted with emergency access to my accounts. And when I canceled the cards and filed fraud charges, they didn't apologize or try to explain. They showed up at my door with a lawyer, ready to destroy me, completely unaware of who they were really dealing with. My name is Vivien, and I'm 72 years old. And before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because I truly love connecting with all of you. And now let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because the betrayal I'm about to share changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband passed away when I was 45. My oldest, now 50, followed by Jennifer at 47 and Daniel at 44. And for years I worked 2 jobs, bookkeeping during the day and weekend shifts at a hospital cafeteria, just to put all 3 of them through college. I never remarried, and every spare dollar I had went toward their education, their weddings, their first homes, because I told myself that was what good mothers did. They sacrificed. By the time I retired at 6, I had saved carefully, with my pension, some modest investments, and about $180,000 in savings. Not wealthy by any means, but comfortable, and for the first time I could breathe, stop counting every penny, maybe take 1 trip a year, buy books without guilt, donate to my church without calculating whether I'd still have enough for groceries. The trouble started about 8 months ago during Sunday dinner at Michael's house, when all 3 of my children were there with their spouses, and the conversation turned to emergency preparedness, and Michael, who works in insurance, brought up the importance of backup plans, asking, as he passed me the mashed potatoes, what would happen if I had a medical emergency and couldn't access my accounts, saying they'd been worried about me living alone. And although I'd been living alone for 27 years, perfectly capable, I understood his concern. Jennifer chimed in immediately, saying he was right, and asking what if I were in the hospital and needed someone to pay bills or handle urgent expenses, suggesting I add them as authorized users on at least 1 or 2 of my credit cards just for emergencies, while Daniel nodded enthusiastically and called it a safety net, promising they'd never use them unless I absolutely needed them to. But if God forbid something happened, at least they could take care of things for me. And they made it all sound so reasonable, so caring. I had 3 credit cards, one I used regularly for everyday expenses with a $15,000 limit, one for larger purchases with a $20,000 limit, and one I kept for true emergencies with a $25,000 limit. And the idea of my children having access to help me if I was incapacitated seemed sensible, so I said slowly that I supposed it made sense, but only for emergencies. And Michael assured me with his hand on my shoulder that it would be only emergencies. Within a week I had added all 3 of them as authorized users on all 3 cards. They each received their own cards in the mail, and I remember Jennifer calling to thank me, telling me how much peace of mind it gave her, knowing she could help if I needed it. And I felt like a responsible parent planning ahead. The first unusual charge appeared 6 weeks later when I was reviewing the statement for my everyday card and noticed a purchase at Nordstrom for $840, a store I didn't shop at. And when I called the number on the back of the card and was transferred twice, a representative confirmed the purchase had been made in California, even though I lived in Ohio and had never been to California, and it had been made with an authorized user card registered to Jennifer's name. So I called her immediately and asked if she'd used my credit card at Nordstrom, mentioning the charge. And after a brief pause she apologized, saying she should have asked first, that her washing machine had completely died. She was between paychecks, didn't want to bother me, but needed it replaced urgently, and promised she'd pay me back that Friday. A washing machine from Nordstrom seemed odd, but she sounded genuinely apologetic, so I told her okay and asked her to let me know when she transferred the money. But Friday came and went with no payment, and when I called the following week she apologized again, saying her car had needed unexpected repairs and she'd pay me back next month for sure. And while I was disappointed, I wasn't alarmed, because Jennifer had always been a bit scattered with money, even as a child. Then I got my next statement, and this one showed $2,300 in charges I didn't recognize. An expensive dinner in Chicago for $420, a hotel in Miami for $680, designer shoes for $890, and several smaller purchases at boutiques and spas. and when I looked closer, I saw the charges had been made with Michael's authorized card and Daniel's authorized card. My hands starting to shake as I called Michael first. And before I'd even finished asking, he said he could explain, telling me it was his anniversary with Lisa and he wanted to do something special, that things had been tight since his bonus hadn't come through at work, that he'd been going to tell me and pay me back, that it was temporary, and he swore it. And when I told him this wasn't the agreement, that the cards were for my emergencies and not his anniversary vacation, he said, I know, you're absolutely right, I made a mistake. I'll transfer you the money next week when my paycheck comes in, he said. But something in his voice felt rehearsed, too smooth. And after hanging up, I called Daniel next about his Chargers luxury skincare products and a golf club membership, and he actually laughed, telling me I worried too much, that it wasn't like I used those cards anyway, that I'd told them myself I hardly ever touched the one with the $25,000 limit, and what was the harm in them using some of the available credit, because we were family. And when I told him that wasn't how credit cards worked, that I was responsible for every purchase and they were supposed to pay me back and would eventually, he snapped that I was acting like they'd stolen from me, and repeated, "We're your children," a phrase that would haunt me long after, because they were my children. After that, I started checking my accounts obsessively, logging in every single day to review transactions, and every single day there were more charges. Jennifer bought a designer handbag for $3,200. Michael booked another trip, this time to Las Vegas, for $4,100. Daniel purchased a luxury watch for $5,800, and none of them paid me back, not a single dollar. And whenever I confronted them individually, I got nothing but excuses. Jennifer claimed unexpected dental work. Michael said his company was restructuring and he was stressed. Daniel blamed medical expenses for his wife. Always something, always a reason why they couldn't repay me, but somehow could still make new purchases. "Mom, we'll settle up eventually," Michael said when I called him, my voice shaking with anger, asking why I was being so uptight, pointing out that I had good credit, that I wasn't even using the money, that they needed it more than I did right now. And when I told him I had worked 50 years for that security, and that it wasn't their money to need, Jennifer jumped in on a three-way call I'd arranged, reminding me that we were family, and family helped each other, accusing me of making them feel guilty after everything I'd spent on them over the years, saying I practically forced them to go to expensive colleges, and insisted on contributing to their weddings. And now, I was keeping score. And I felt like I'd been slapped as they turned my sacrifices, my choices made out of love, into debts they believed they were owed. I told them firmly that I wanted the cards back, all of them, and that they needed to mail them to me that week. But Daniel dismissed me, telling me not to be dramatic, that they'd pay me back and I just needed to give them some time. Yet the cards never came back and the charges never stopped. And over the next 3 months, I watched helplessly as the numbers climbed while credit card representatives sympathetically but clearly explained that as authorized users, my children had every legal right to use the cards, that I'd given them permission, and unless I removed them and reported fraud, there was nothing they could do. And even then the charges would still be my responsibility, and by that point I'd already paid $11,000, just trying to keep my credit from being destroyed as my carefully built savings drained away, and my children showed no remorse, barely returning my calls, unless they wanted something else. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in April when all 3 credit card statements arrived on the same day, my hands trembling as I opened them, already dreading what I'd find. The everyday card maxed out at $15,000. The larger purchase card maxed out at $20,000. The emergency card showing $12,000 used of the $25,000 limit. A total of $47,000 in charges. I never made, and I spread the statements across my kitchen table, my reading glasses slipping down my nose as I went through each line item. Gucci, Louis Vuitton, first-class flights to Paris, a 5-star hotel in Manhattan, jewelry, electronics, designer clothes, a $6,000 purse, a $4,800 dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, spa treatments, concert tickets, things I couldn't afford in my entire working life, purchased casually with my credit by the children I'd raised. I thought about the years I'd eaten ramen noodles so they could have new shoes, the times I'd worked double shifts so they could go on school trips, the vacation I'd never taken, the car I'd driven for 15 years, the second-hand furniture I'd refinished instead of replacing, all so they could have better. And this was how they repaid me, not with gratitude, not even with indifference, but with theft. because that's what it was. No matter what they called it or how they justified it, they had stolen from me. I picked up my phone and called each of them one final time. Michael didn't answer. Jennifer sent me to voicemail. Daniel texted that he couldn't talk because he was in a meeting and, sitting alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my children's betrayal, I made a decision that I wasn't going to be a victim in this story, because I had spent my entire life being soft, being understanding, being the mother who sacrificed and forgave. Where had it gotten me? I wondered, as I called my bank first and put a fraud alert on all my accounts, then called each credit card company and did 3 things in a row. I reported every single charge made by the authorized users as fraudulent. I removed all 3 of my children as authorized users effective immediately, and I canceled all 3 credit cards and requested new account numbers. And when the representatives warned me this would trigger investigations, I told them to investigate away. That same afternoon, I filed police reports, walking into my local precinct with all 3 statements, full account records, and printed emails showing my children's refusal to repay me. And when the officer looked at me with concern and asked if I understood this meant my children could face criminal charges, I told him I understood perfectly that they had committed fraud, that they had stolen nearly $50,000 from me, and that the fact they were my children didn't change what they had done. I thought filing the reports would bring relief, but instead it brought war. And Michael called me at 11 o'clock that night, his voice cold with rage as he demanded to know what the hell I had done. And I told him calmly, though my heart was racing, that I had protected myself from thieves, only for him to shout that they were my children, that I had filed criminal charges against my own children, and asked if I had any idea what this could do to their careers and reputations, what I had done to his financial security, his retirement, his peace of mind. And when he insisted they were going to pay me back, I asked him when, because he had had months and every opportunity, and instead he had maxed out my cards buying luxury items I could never afford. Jennifer called minutes after he hung up, crying, with her voice high and panicked, saying the police had called her and asking how I could do this to her because she was my daughter, and I told her I was her mother, the one she had stolen from, without hesitation. And when she claimed they hadn't stolen because I had given them the cards for emergencies, not for designer handbags and vacations, she sobbed that she couldn't believe I would do this to my own family and warned me to wait until everyone found out what kind of mother I really was. Daniel's message came by text, laced with venom, accusing me of destroying the family over money, calling me pathetic, saying they would never forgive me, and that I should never expect to see my grandchildren again. And if you're watching this and thinking about subscribing to hear how this turns out, please hit that button now, because you're going to want to see what happened next. I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong. And 3 days after I filed the police reports, my doorbell rang at 8 o'clock in the morning, and when I opened the door I found all 3 of my children standing on my porch with a man in an expensive suit holding a leather briefcase who introduced himself as Gregory Walsh, said he represented my children, and asked if they could come in. And although my stomach dropped, I stood my ground and told him no, while Michael said we needed to talk and accused me of making a serious mistake. And I told him the only mistake I had made was trusting them. Gregory Walsh smiled without warmth and advised me to reconsider my position, saying his clients were prepared to pursue legal action against me for defamation, emotional distress, and abuse of process, accusing me of filing false police reports when they were explicitly authorized to use the credit cards. And when I said they were authorized for emergencies and not shopping sprees, he replied that authorization was authorization legally speaking, that there was no written contract limiting their use, that my credit card agreements showed them as authorized users with full privileges, and that by filing criminal charges, I had subjected them to public humiliation, professional damage, and severe emotional distress. Jennifer stepped forward with red eyes and begged me not to sue, saying she didn't want this to get uglier, and that we could work it out as a family if I just dropped the charges. And when I repeated work it out and said they had stolen $47,000 from me, Michael interjected that they were willing to set up a payment plan of $50 a month from each of them and would pay me back eventually. And as I did the math in my head and realized it would take over 26 years and I would be 98 years old, I told them that wasn't acceptable. Gregory Walsh then opened his briefcase and pulled out a document, saying I left them no choice and handing me a cease and desist letter demanding I withdraw all police reports and publicly retract my accusations within 72 hours or they would file a lawsuit, seeking $200,000 in damages for harm to their reputations and mental health. And though my hands were shaking, I kept my voice steady and told them to get off my property. And when Daniel started to protest, I repeated it, telling all of them to leave and informing Mr. Walsh that he could tell my children I would see them in court. After they left, I sat on my couch and cried for the first time since this started, not because I was afraid of their lawyer or doubted my decision, but because I was mourning the children I thought I had raised and the people I believed they were. And then I dried my eyes and got to work, calling a lawyer of my own, Patricia Riss, the woman who had handled my will years ago, explaining everything and showing her the statements, the police reports, and the cease and desist letter. And as she listened carefully and took notes, she told me that this was actually more straightforward than I might think. That while they were authorized users, authorization did not mean they had permission to make personal purchases for their own benefit. The credit card agreement you have with the company is for your use. The credit card agreement you have with the company is for your use. Authorized users are meant to act on your behalf, not enrich themselves. But they have a lawyer saying they have a lawyer trying to bully you into dropping charges. Patricia interrupted. This Gregory Walsh is probably charging them a fortune to write scary letters. The truth is they have very little legal ground to stand on. The credit card companies will cooperate with the fraud investigation because they don't want to be held liable either. And your children's own spending patterns prove they weren't making emergency purchases on your behalf. She paused. But I need to ask you something. Are you sure you want to pursue this? These are your children. This will likely destroy your relationship with them. I thought about that question. Really thought about it. They destroyed the relationship when they decided I was an ATM machine instead of their mother. I said finally, I spent decades putting them first. I sacrificed everything for them. And the moment I needed them to be decent human beings, to show basic respect for what I'd worked for, they chose designer purses and luxury vacations instead. What relationship is there left to destroy? Patricia nodded. Then let's fight back over the next 6 weeks. Patricia worked with the police and the credit card companies to build a comprehensive case. What we discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. The credit card companies provided detailed records of every transaction. Michael had used my cards to fund a gambling habit I never knew about. Over $18,000 in charges at casinos and online betting sites. Jennifer had purchased luxury items and then resold many of them online for cash, essentially laundering money from my credit. Daniel had added his girlfriend as an additional user on one of my accounts without my knowledge, and she'd run up $6,000 in charges at stores I'd never heard of. They'd also lied about their financial situations. Michael had received his bonus from work. He'd used it for a down payment on a boat. Jennifer's unexpected dental work was actually cosmetic veneers she'd wanted for years. Daniel had no medical expenses. His wife had left him 3 months ago, and he'd been using my money to fund his newly single lifestyle. The police investigation revealed they'd discussed their plan in a group text thread. Jennifer had written, "Mom's not even using this credit. We're not hurting anyone." Michael responded, "She'll never know if we keep it under control," Daniel added. "And if she does find out, what's she going to do? Disown us?" She'd never. They'd calculated my love for them as permission to steal. They'd weaponized the fact that I was their mother. Patricia presented all of this evidence to the district attorney's office. The DA assigned a prosecutor named Helen Reeves, a woman in her 50s who listened to my story with increasing anger. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to be very direct with you," Helen said. "Your children committed clear financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult in this state. That's a felony. They coordinated their theft. They lied to you repeatedly. They showed no remorse. They tried to intimidate you with legal threats. This is textbook elder financial abuse." "I'm not vulnerable," I protested. "I'm perfectly capable." "Vulnerability isn't about capability," Helen explained. "It's about the relationship. They exploited their position as your children, people you trusted implicitly, to steal from you. That's what makes it abuse." Gregory Walsh sent another letter, this time offering to settle. My children would plead guilty to misdemeanor charges, pay restitution of $10,000 total, and complete community service in exchange. I'd agree not to pursue civil damages. Patricia looked at me. "It's your decision." I thought about the washing machine that was never broken, the anniversary trip Michael could have saved for honestly, Jennifer's crocodile tears, Daniel's threats about my grandchildren, the casual cruelty of what's the harm in us using some of the available credit. "No," I said, "no deal. The preliminary hearing was held in August. All three of my children appeared with Gregory Walsh, who clearly hadn't expected me to reject their settlement offer. They sat on the other side of the courtroom, not looking at me. Helen Reeves presented the evidence, methodically. The credit card statements, the text messages, the spending patterns that proved none of this was emergency related, the lies they'd told me, the intimidation tactics they'd used after I filed charges. Gregory Walsh tried to argue that this was a family dispute, not a criminal matter, that I'd given permission, however informally, that my children had always intended to pay me back. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Chen, cut him off. Mr. Walsh, intention means nothing when your clients maxed out their mother's credit cards, buying luxury goods for themselves. The evidence is clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was systematic theft. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. She set bail at $50,000 for each of my children, $150,000 total. Gregory Walsh objected strenuously, but the judge was unmoved. These defendants showed premeditation, coordination, and a clear intent to exploit their mother's trust. Judge Chen said they showed no remorse and actually attempted to further victimize her with legal threats. I consider them a financial danger to the victim. Bail stands. I watched my children's faces as the reality set in. Jennifer started crying. Michael looked like he might be sick, while Daniel stared at me with pure hatred, and they each posted bail within hours. Though I later learned they'd borrowed the money from their in-laws, who were horrified by what they'd done. Gregory Walsh tried one more time to negotiate a plea deal, but Helen Reeves refused, telling him flatly that his clients had their chance and they rejected it. When they showed up at Mrs. Patterson's home with legal threats instead of restitution, and that this was going to trial, which began in October, on a cold Monday morning, in a courtroom smaller than I'd expected, with only a handful of people in the gallery, some reporters, a few curious observers, and my children's spouses sitting there looking miserable while Helen Reeves built her case piece by piece, calling representatives from each credit card company to testify about the charges, the authorization process, and how authorized user accounts were meant to function, introducing the text messages where my children discussed their plans, and showing receipts for the luxury items, the handbags, the watches, the vacation packages, before finally calling me to the witness stand, a moment I'd been dreading but one Patricia had prepared me for well. As Helen asked about my relationship with my children, why I'd added them as authorized users, and how I discovered the charges, and I spoke slowly and clearly, looking at the jury as I answered, saying I trusted them completely because they were my children, that when they asked to be added to my cards for emergencies, I never imagined they'd use that access to steal from me, that I'd spent 50 years building financial security, working 2 jobs and sacrificing constantly, only for them to take it in 3 months to buy things they wanted but didn't need. After which Gregory Walsh cross-examined me, trying to suggest I'd been unclear about the terms, that emergency was ambiguous, and that I'd been negligent in not monitoring the accounts sooner. Asking if it was true, I rarely checked the statements, to which I replied that I trusted my children not to steal from me, and that wasn't negligence, it was parenting. And when he pointed out there were no written restrictions, I interrupted with an analogy about giving someone house keys to water plants, not meaning they could move in and sell the furniture, making it clear that authorization for a specific purpose wasn't authorization for anything you want, a point that drew nods from several jurors and made Gregory Walsh move on quickly. When my children testified in their own defense, I watched them carefully, as Michael claimed he genuinely believed I wouldn't mind because our family had always shared resources. Jennifer cried and said she'd made mistakes but never meant to hurt me, and Daniel remained defiant, insisting I was vindictive and cruel for pressing charges over family matters. Yet not one of them apologized or looked at me and said they were sorry during the entire trial. And, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts for Michael Patterson, Jennifer Morrison, and Daniel Patterson on the count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, leaving the courtroom silent as the verdicts were read, and my children sitting motionless with pale faces, Jennifer burying her face in her hands, Michael staring straight ahead, and Daniel's jaw clenched with anger when he glanced my way. After which Judge Chen scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later, and as the bailiffs led my children out, Jennifer finally turned to look at me, though I felt nothing but the cold certainty that this was justice, not victory, just exhaustion, a feeling that stayed with me through the brief sentencing hearing where, Helen Reeves requested significant penalties due to the breach of trust, the amounts stolen, and the complete lack of remorse, while Gregory Walsh pleaded for leniency, calling them first-time offenders who'd made mistakes but were otherwise productive members of society, only for Judge Chen to look at each of my children and say they hadn't made mistakes but choices, choosing to exploit their mother's trust, to steal from the woman who sacrificed everything for them, to max out her credit cards on luxury items while her retirement savings disappeared, and then to hire a lawyer to threaten her when she sought accountability, stating this wasn't desperation but entitlement, an entitlement that destroyed their relationship with me and damaged 3 families, before handing down sentences of 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, and $18,000 restitution for Michael, 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and $16,000 restitution for Jennifer, and 2 years in prison, 3 years probation, and $13,000 restitution for Daniel, along with financial literacy courses, counseling, and felony records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. And as the sentences were read, Jennifer sobbed. Michael sat perfectly still, his face blank, while Daniel looked at me one last time, his expression a mixture of disbelief and rage, as if even now he couldn't accept that I'd actually followed through. And then the bailiffs took them away and I watched them go. These 3 people I'd carried inside me, nursed, raised, loved with everything I had, and I felt nothing but relief that it was over. After the convictions, the credit card companies erased the $47,000 in fraudulent charges from my accounts, and the restitution my children were ordered to pay covered what I'd already paid out of pocket trying to keep my credit intact. And although my credit score had plummeted during those months, it began to slowly recover as I changed banks, got new credit cards with security features I'd never needed before, and set up alerts for every transaction, learning expensive lessons about trust and family and the difference between the two. While Patricia Riss became a friend and we sometimes have coffee and don't talk about the case. And months later, Helen Reeves sent me a note telling me I'd been brave, which I kept in my kitchen drawer even though I'm not sure brave is the right word, because I was just a woman who refused to be a victim. My children's spouses divorced them. Michael lost his job, Jennifer's friends abandoned her, and Daniel moved to another state after his release, none of them speaking to me anymore, and me not speaking to them, though my grandchildren, Daniel's teenage daughter, and Michael's 2 sons reached out when they turned 18 and learned what really happened. And we have lunch sometimes, and they apologize for things that were never their fault. I'm 73 now, living alone in the same house with better locks and a security system, my savings rebuilding slowly, taking one modest but meaningful trip each year, donating to charities that help elder abuse victims, and surrounded by friends at church who know my story and don't pity me for it. And when people ask if I regret pressing charges against my own children, the answer is simple. I regret raising people who thought stealing from their mother was acceptable. I regret that they felt entitled to what I'd worked for, and I regret that they valued luxury items more than integrity. But I don't regret holding them accountable. Not for 1 second, because the real betrayal was never the money. It was the moment I realized my children saw me as someone to exploit rather than someone to love. And that's what I lost, and what I fought to preserve in myself. The knowledge that I deserved better, even from my own family. Because the worst part wasn't taking them to court, it was realizing I had to.